Michael, it's good to see you.
Brett, thank you for having me. It's great to see you.
Well, you wrote an absolutely first rate and I would add important essay for our latest issue of SAPIR, the fall 2025 issue, Building Israel's $1 trillion Economy and subtitled and why we must. It's a theme that's actually been very much present in my mind for years, and so I'm so glad that we had someone like you to kind of spell it out in detail. I have to laugh a little bit, Michael, because when I lived in Israel and I was editor of the Jerusalem Post, I used to get laughed at for insisting on dressing in a coat and tie for coming to work. And so now I notice that you're in a suit and I'm considerably less casual, which tells you something about the evolution of the Israeli economy over the past 25 years or so. But it's nice to see people so formal in Israel.
Brett, are you wearing
Uh,
sandals?
I'm barefoot. How's that? I know this is not what we're here to talk about, but when I became editor of the Jerusalem Post, it was the very beginning, 2002, very beginning of of Israel, when Prime Minister Sharon decided to invade or send tanks into Ramallah. The big moment. You were there. And so I was invited with a number of other Israeli editors to the Kiryat to meet with the prime minister. And I thought, I was a young editor. I was 28 years old. I thought, okay, well, it's the prime minister. And I, of course, was in a suit and tie. Not only was I the only person in the room, including the prime minister who was wearing a tie, I was the only person in the room whose shirt was tucked in. So that just tells you something about the distance that Israelis have traveled over the last 25 years. I think that's reflected in your essay also on the economic front, and this is what I really wanted us to talk about. You point out that around 50 years ago, right after the Yom Kippur War, Israel, with a population of about 3 million people at the time, had a GDP of $11 billion. Um, uh, it was even at my first visit to Israel in the 1980s. I remember essentially a poor country, or certainly not a first world country. First world people, but not a first world economy. Today, you can't, anyone who spends any time in Israel, I think, is awed by the level of wealth that they encounter, not just in Tel Aviv, but really in so many places in the country. That's reflected in the figures. GDP of $580 billion. That's a 51-fold increase over what it was 50 years ago. Per capita GDP of $58,000 is ahead of Britain, Germany, and Canada. You quote the FT's Ruchir Sharma in your essay, noting that total factor productivity in Israel, which measures labor and new machines, has grown 4 times faster in Israel than in any other developed economy over the past 25 years, and now has the sixth highest GDP per capita. Israel has the sixth highest GDP per capita of countries more than 10 million people. That is to say, the little countries like Qatar or Brunei. It is in that rank of countries. And yet, your thesis, which I think is such a bracing one, and I really want you to talk about it, is Israel cannot for one moment rest on its laurels, cannot sit still. Israelis have to go for a $1 trillion economy. This is not a luxury. This is a necessity for national survival. So I just want to begin. I know we're going to get into a number of topics in our conversation before we open it up to audience questions. But I want to begin by your thinking why this is not optional for Israelis. They have to continue to grow at a breakneck pace, really just for the sake of national survival, not just thriving.
So, First of all, thanks for having me. I should just set the record straight. I normally dress in a polo shirt and jeans. I was coming for a meeting where I required a tie, and then I said I cannot turn up to a Bret Stephens interview and dress down to it. It would be totally disrespectful. And so, the kind of three main points in answer to your question. Number one, the economy pays for our defense budget. That's first and foremost. I mean, we spent a lot of money, highlighted in the piece, since the war broke out on October 7th, stunning amounts of money, and yet our debt to GDP ratio is still one of the best in the Western world right now. Some of that has to do with the profligate spending in other countries, but part of it also has to do with the fact that our economy is growing and it's been managed correctly fiscally. And so we need a booming economy to pay for the defense of this country because this is not a friendly neighborhood. It never was, hasn't been for 3,000, 4,000 years, and it's likely not to be for the next 1,000 years. And our strength comes from our innovation. Our strength comes from our ability to invest in advanced technology weaponry, which creates leverage over other countries and makes people sometimes not want to start up with us or at least pay a price for when they do. That's number one. Number two, I argued in a different book that I wrote called The Vanishing Jew about 10 years ago, which unfortunately was made for this moment in history where socialism has reemerged in New York City and anti-Semitism has reared its very ugly head over the last decade. But the point I made there is, and I think it's true, by the way, broadly, if you read the Bible and human history, is people are economic beings. They chase opportunity. And if you want to ask how Israel gets out of what Donald Trump calls the problem of being a small country, is we need a booming economy. A booming economy attracts talent. It attracts Jews who want to move here and Jewish people who want to be successful. And it attracts other countries that want to do business with us. And those bonds, both in terms of the growth of our own population, the bonds with third-party countries, is what keeps us safe and keeps us thriving. And that's a virtuous cycle. And then there's a third reason, which is we have a booming birth rate. Okay, we're the only Western country with like over 3 children per woman, and in order to provide the goodies like free healthcare, basically free healthcare that we have here, and free education, or basically free education like we have here, the economy needs to keep growing at a rapid pace to keep up with the demographic growth. The per capita statistic is stunning here because we have this breakneck demographic birth rate. And so for us to pay for that which our citizens expect requires fast economic growth. And that's a framework that I use for why we need to keep at this. By the way, fortunately, there's like 2 countries in the world right now, maybe 3, with like plus 4%, 4%, 4+% growth rates going on now. One's the United States and the other is Israel. The big difference between the two of them, one is 400 million people, the other is 10 million people. But the other big difference is our debt to GDP is in reasonably good shape, and the U.S. is a lot less so.
So, people ever since our friends Dan Senor and Saul Singer wrote that book, must be going on almost 20 years ago, actually, Startup Nation.
By the
People have.
way, I don't mean to cut you off, but we just pause for a second on Dan Senor and Saul Singer. They're the first 2 people ever in history to brand an entire country. And like we should just marvel at that for a second. It's stunning. Startup Nation branded a country and a movement. And it's 2 guys.
Well, that's not entirely true because there were a bunch of Jews who branded the United States as the Golden Medina, and that name stuck around too. But that is true. I think in recent history, it's hard to match that achievement. And besides which, it was not only a very good book, but it kind of predicted much of what came next. But Startup Nation at the time really had to do with sectors of the Israeli economy typically associated with technology. And one of the points that you, I think, very wisely make in your piece, and which is something that anyone who's lived in Israel experiences, is that growth is not, in fact, evenly distributed across different industry sectors or service sectors. It is highly concentrated in the tech space. So when you talk about Israel's economy, you keep coming back to a handful of names. You mentioned that in March of this year, Google acquired cybersecurity company, an Israeli cybersecurity company called Wiz, $32 billion. NVIDIA is setting up a huge campus. You drive north up through Herzliya, you see all of the tech majors. But you look at other sectors of the Israeli economy, they're not quite so healthy, and they're weighed down. And so let's think about those. One of the things that strikes me about Israel is that infrastructure projects seem to be tied down in red tape. Not so different from here in the United States, but nonetheless surprising, given a country with this reputation for being fast moving, fast acting.
We have, like many countries, a dichotomy between our public sector and our private sector. That's point one. Anything that's a public sector project, read like the Tel Aviv Metro or the Jerusalem Light Rail or the Ben Gurion project, which was, I don't know, 10 or 15 years behind schedule and billions of dollars. Or by the way, you can point to California and the big project to connect San Francisco to Los Angeles with rail.
Yeah.
But our public sector is highly inefficient. And I think our prime minister is known for saying that they don't count, yeah, time is not money in the government, and that's a big problem. And the this is enormous problem, and there isn't a price to pay for it, which is like quite stunning, not at the political level nor at the bureaucratic level. Here, the bureaucrats are protected by unions, and the politicians, I can't figure out why they're protected, but they seem to be, and kind of bounce around from place to place despite kind of poor results. That having been said, we should also note that some incredible bureaucrats, many years ago, most of their names we don't know, engaged in desalination. So we are a water-rich country despite living in this very arid area. Many years ago, some bureaucrats in the defense ministry invented or pushed ahead with Iron Dome against the advice of many, many experts. By the way, Amir Peretz, a former politician, deserves a lot of credit for that.
And a
As well.
former union leader, by the way.
And a former union leader. Yeah,
Yeah.
correct. And so this is a mixed bag, but you're right that the public sector moves at a snail's pace and gums up the works. And when I say gums up the works, that's also for other parts of the economy. So, I have to say, I have a company that needs to set up a factory now in Israel. Normally, I do mostly digital stuff, but I've gotten engaged in physical goods over the last 6 or 7 years. And so we want to set up a factory in Israel. And I figured, all right, we need this fast because we're moving at breakneck speed. So I called somebody who's involved in the Gaza envelope, hoping that they could cut through some of the red tape. And I said, hey, we're going to set up this factory. We'll come do it in the Gaza envelope. We want to rebuild the economy down there. How long is it going to take to get a permit? He said, about a year. That should be pretty fast. A year? I can't wait a year. And so permitting here is a big problem. Add to that the fact that we have very low unemployment. And so finding workers for jobs is very, very hard. Add to that the fact that the productivity, even despite the good statistic I mentioned, in some of these laggard industries is let's just say not world class. And you have a tale of two economies. And I think the interesting thing, though, which I didn't talk about in the piece, but I think is important to note, we're headed to an era right now that'll be AI infused and perhaps AI dominated. And so I expect that in many countries, the bifurcation of the economy between the digital economy and the other economy is going to get wider, by the way, and that will be true in service industries as well, because AI is coming for service industries more than it's coming for any other industry right now. And I expect that to get wider. And the question becomes, what comes into this mix? What do you put in here to solve this? So I'm hopeful of, but you can't promise, is that AI and robotics, Israel does a good job of taking advantage of because we are a technologically advanced society on the civilian level, number one. I fear that regulation will stop us. We still don't have Uber in Israel. Israel should be the most obvious country on planet Earth for Tesla robo-taxis, but yet they're not green lighted here. For some reason, green lit here, I guess is the right word, for some reason that I can't explain. And so we got to break through the bureaucratic morass. I'm encouraged by something I wrote in the article, which is the setting up of this national AI directorate under my friend Major General Erez Askal, who's moving at lightning speed, that he'll be able to cut through some red tape and enable these things. But yes, we are a tale of two economies still. We need to figure out how to bring the quote unquote older economy or the mere bureaucratic economy, a more physical goods economy into the 21st century, and that's going to take a yeoman's effort, and it's going to take the government to actually adopt a different posture as it relates to many of these economies. We're going to have to move a lot faster. And I finished with one thing. I've been writing this for 16, 17 years. Our big advantage should be our smallness. And we should be more nimble than we are, but we're not because we have this crazy overlay of like a Bolshevik and a German and a British bureaucratic system and coalition politics that are from hell. And so, that is a lethal combination. And we somehow got to find a way to accelerate that meaningfully. And again, at the same time, and I'll add this again, we have the greatest citizens on planet Earth. No disrespect to anybody listening from anywhere on the planet. But if October 8th proved anything, is the greatest citizens on planet Earth live in Israel. And what's happened over the last 2 years is nothing short of heroic and stunning.
By the way, I'm just saying to our audience, as Michael says things that provoke thinking, questions, challenges, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom page. So put those questions in, and I will try to get to as many of them as possible in the last 20 minutes of the conversation. You referred to something, coalition politics from hell, which is a very well taken point, because it raises questions about the plausibility of some of your chief recommendations. And I just want your thinking about whether there are ways, hacks, so to speak, where the political impediments to more effective economic decision making can be removed, or they're workarounds. One of the points that you make is that Israel needs to move from social entitlement budgeting to strategic capital allocation. And you add as an additional point that it has to be rooted in Zionist values. National service plus economic contribution equals priority budget recipient. Now, that is not happening these days for, I think, reasons that are kind of familiar to everyone who's on this call. Do you see any positive forward movement, any possibility of change there? Because a lot of people, lovers of Israel, look at a distance, and they keep in mind that aphorism that in Israel, a third of the country works, a third of the country serves in the army, a third of the country pays taxes, and it's the same third, right? There's some truth in that aphorism. So, as Lenin once asked, what is to be done?
So let me start at 100,000 feet for a second. So, and I wrote this in this book I published in Hebrew about 6 months into the war called Anu Yisraelim HaHeroim, translated as We the Heroic Israelis. And what I argue there is that the social welfare state is dead, not just in Israel. It's actually dead in Europe. For those who follow what's going on, for example, in Denmark, and the New York Times has actually covered this very, very extensively and well. Denmark is like the only country in Europe that actually managed to keep its social welfare state together because it basically banned immigration without calling it an immigration ban. And what lies behind that? What lies behind that is an understanding that the social welfare state has been captured by the fringes in every other country on planet Earth, basically. The United States, it's true. It's true in the UK in spades. It's true in France in spades. And the social welfare state has been captured and then turned on the main body politic. It has been engineered to serve the fringes. And we don't have to get into the reasons why and the movements that created this, but that's become a fact that is bankrupting countries. Now, in Israel, we have a similar challenge. Our situation is better. I want to stress this again. On a comparative basis, we are in way better shape than almost every Western European country and the United States as it relates to macroeconomics. That's number one. At the same time, we don't have enough of our budget if we're going to hit our growth targets and really create a growing society. We have too much money spent on what I call spending rather than on investment. And that spending is because of the engineering of the social welfare state for certain populations in the country, largely due, in this country at least, to coalition politics. But it's important to note that the same phenomenon is happening in other countries in a worse scale than it happens in Israel. Most of Western Europe is captured by this problem. And so my own view is that the social welfare state cannot survive. It's dead, particularly in the era, of AI and the return of wars and the need to raise defense budgets globally, but also in Israel. It doesn't make it. It's finished. And so therefore, it needs to be changed, adapted, adjusted to the reality. And the first part of that reality is, I think, Israel, because we're what I like to call SIFOs, second in, first out to these wars. Ukraine was first in to these wars that we're in right now, is going to be forced to focus its budget in the places it matters and can generate growth. And it's going to be forced to focus, and I hope we'll decide before it's forced, because that will save us a lot of heartache and pain and maybe some lost years of the economy, to focus on that same one-third of the population you're talking about, which I believe is larger than one-third at this point, but not much. And we have to focus on that. The welfare state, or what will remain of it, will need to service the core productive part of the population. And I know that sounds like an oxymoron, because the welfare state's for those people who, for whatever reason, haven't been lucky. Yes, for those who haven't been lucky, but have chosen to be part of the productive and the serving class of society that align with those core Zionist ethos. Now, hidden in your question is this possible in coalition politics? And I think the answer is
It
yes.
wasn't hidden. It's explicit in my question, but go for it.
I'll argue that a lot of the governments of the last 15 years um, are the way they are because of a dichotomy in Israeli politics that is silly, which is yes, Bibi or no Bibi. Um, and it's been stated by many parties that they won't sit at this point with the guy who won the most votes. And you can win an election and then you don't have to make those choices. But the way the system works is somebody gets the most votes for the most part. If you didn't and you had 6 seats like Bennett did, you don't last that long as the prime minister. It's too brittle. And so therefore, generally, not always, but generally, the guy with the most votes or second most votes is likely going to be the prime minister. And so if we have a reorienting of the body politicians, not the body politic, the body politic is already anchored around this. There is a coalition that agrees on core Zionist values that spans about 75 seats plus in the Knesset. That's the body politic. The politicians have decided that they can't find this constellation. I think the war, I hope and pray that the war is reorienting this, and that all the politicians understand it doesn't matter who wins, that the core body politic, those 75, 80 seats in the Knesset, who represent the one-third or plus that you talked about, decide to form a joint coalition. That's what we need. You can add the fringes afterwards, but the core productive Zionist people need to be the core of that coalition, and the state needs to invest in them. Right now, we're doing fixes, a little more for reservists, and they hand that out. And something I was involved in, which is a reduction in taxes for reservists. So therefore, you have, by the way, it's a work incentive. People who work get a reduction in their taxes, and they're also the server. It identifies people as the service class. Called in other times, it might have been called noblesse oblige, but I don't think it's noblesse. It's the common Israeli. That's who the common Israeli are. Early in the war, I drafted a law together with Likud member of Knesset Moshe Saada, who's kind of way down the Likud list, super capable guy. And the law we drafted is called in Hebrew Chok Ma'amad HaMesharet, which means the law that sets up the status of he who serves or she who serves, right? Which means if you serve in the military or national service, but mostly in the military, you have a special status, meaning you are the status symbol of our society. And therefore, the welfare state goes to you. And if you don't have that status, then the welfare state gets dramatically reduced for you. And that's where I think we're headed. And I think if we get there, and I think we're forced to get there, so we'll get there, it's a question of how fast, we can be the model for all of Western Europe who needs to get their act together before they wither and die, which is where we're headed.
Your hopes for Western Europe are greater than mine, but we'll see how far that example carries. Let me talk.
Brett, I tweeted something today contrasting. I tweeted slides from our annual investor meeting today, which I never done before, because many of our investors couldn't come to Israel because of silly travel policies in some of these places that hadn't been revised yet, because they would get revised quarterly, even though the ceasefire had hit. So I compared the safety of Tel Aviv to the safety of London, where we ended up doing the meeting. I think it caused some uncomfortable laughs in the room and some cringes.
Just you've piqued my curiosity. Can you give me a detail or two there?
Yeah, like there's no crime, very little crime in Tel Aviv, and stabbings and phone thefts in London are brutal. But no, I'll give you the most interesting slide, I think, is not that. I've been saying this for probably 3.5 years at this point. I've been showing the same slide basically about Israel, which is there's this great picture during the judicial reform protests in the train station in Jerusalem of one side going up and one side going down. They're all holding Israeli flags, and some of them are handing Israeli flags to each other. And the point I've been making for 3.5 years, even before the war, was the thing about Israel is the democratic fight happened in the street, but everybody grabbed the flag. They grabbed the blue and white Israeli flag. It was patriotism at its base. And so then when the war hit on October 7th, the same people who grabbed the flag on both sides of the escalator grabbed a gun and went to war together. And that's part of what I'm saying about the body politic you're in together. Whereas if you look at the UK and the protests there, you got all sorts of flags. You got the Union Jack, you've got the red and white cross flag, you've got the Palestinian flag. You don't even know what the hell you got there. And so the patriotism is out of the UK. But in Israel, no matter what side you're on, you're grabbing the blue and white flag, and that matters.
And also during 9 months of intense protest, I don't think there was a single case of vandalism, smashed windows, looting, anything that of the sort that we saw here in the United States five years ago.
There
Let's
was
get
one
back.
tiny one not long ago. They burnt somebody's car down. But other than that, you're right.
True. Let's get back to your essay because you mention a number of growth sectors, and of course, when you wrote about them, I said to myself, of course, how is this not happening in Israel? But the one that really struck me was talking about creating Israel, turning Israel into a finance capital. And I guess two questions: why hasn't that happened yet? And um, how fast and how most effectively do we make it happen?
So it hasn't happened yet because of um, it's not regulatory as much as it's like just underdeveloped legal system that Israel has. I mean, the country's only around for 77 years, and many of the kind of advancements of Delaware law and partnership structure and the tax treatment of money businesses, investment businesses, has just not evolved yet. It needs to get fixed, and um, and that's happening right now. It's been a lot of work that me and a few other people, there's a guy named Senator Coney, you may know from New York, uh,
Yes, a friend of mine.
okay, and a few others have put into this together with our Minister of Finance, who actually has been a stand-up driver of this, and they're now fixing many parts of it. So Israel is going to have a new tax law as it relates to funds and fund management businesses. My guess is within 8 weeks. Um, that will be super hospitable for investment managers. Number two, it's just passing right now. Uh, the finance minister and the minister of Aliyah have put together a package that if you move your fund to Israel, you will have immense tax benefits as the founder of that investment vehicle to move your fund from wherever it is, London or New York, to Israel. And in general, by the way, they've given tax exemptions to Olim that move over the next couple of years, and they're fixing the regulatory environment around this. And I think this will be done in 8 to 12 weeks. The whole package. At the same time, I said before that people are economic animals. That's just who we are, Homo economicus, and people pursue opportunity. And I think you said a joke about the 1/3 of Israelis before. I think the joke that most people grew up on about Israel was how do you make a small fortune in Israel? Is you come with a big one. It turns
Yeah.
out that the opposite is true today. But I think it's taken time for a few things to converge. One is to understand that this is a incredible place to raise your children. I'll argue it's the best place on planet Earth to raise children today. They get raised with more resilience, more optimism, more fight, which is important, more innovation than any place else on planet Earth. That's number one. Number two, it was hard to set up a fund here, and now that's becoming much easier. And there's interest in doing it. You see, like the first signs that the first funds are getting set up literally as we speak right now, and everyone's talking. And I see this in groups. And so it takes like the first people to jump in the water in the deep end, to go do it, and there's more and more of those. I think Tel Aviv is now an alternative to London, certainly, and I think coming to New York for two reasons. One, it's a beach. But number two, if you compare what it's like to be a Jew today in London to what it is to be a Jew in Tel Aviv, it's, I think, no contest right now, and maybe coming to a theater near New York soon. And so, some people move to Miami. I would argue skip Miami and just come to Tel Aviv. The beach is nicer and the food is better. I think that trend is happening. And I think what you're going to see over the next 36 months, you'll see some very well-known people who you won't imagine will set up shop in Tel Aviv. You're going to see billions of dollars roll into funds in Tel Aviv. I'm aware of at least 500 million already getting set up in Tel Aviv that I know of directly. And my guess is there's more than that. And I think when those seeds get planted and they get celebrated, uh, that's going to matter. I'll add one last thing. The world is moving east. And I made this point in the piece as well. The world is moving east. Um, Population growth is biggest in Southeast Asia and Africa as Europe is dying. And if you think about where Israel is on the time zone map, much like, by the way, like the ancient land of Canaan, which was at the crossroads of the universe between Africa, Asia, and Europe, the same is true from a time zone perspective. And so if you're going to be trading equities or bonds or commodities globally, Israel is actually a pretty good place to do that from. And there's going to be more and more investment opportunities in India and Southeast Asia, as India is an emerging power and Europe is a declining power. And so this, I think, offers big opportunities for anyone who wants to set up an investment vehicle in Israel. And I think more and more people are going to decide to do that.
One point that you didn't mention, well, you mentioned it in passing, but it's something I've been wondering about. One challenge during the war was certainly when the Biden administration was in office, was this perpetual threat by the Biden by the president to cut off Israel's supply of weapons, and it disturbed me a little to think of how dependent even now Israel is on that pipeline of 500-pound bombs, 2,000-pound bombs. The prime minister spoke of somewhat notoriously of making Israel into Sparta. I think his words were misunderstood, but it nonetheless becoming much more self-reliant when it comes to its military industries. Is that also a national necessity? Is it a possibility? Why isn't it that Israel can't have its own massive ordnance penetrators so it doesn't have to rely on other countries to provide sort of essential elements of its self-defense?
So there's a few things we need to unpack here, and we need to do it carefully. Um, Number one, there are platforms like F-35s, just as an example, or big naval carriers that it's unlikely that a country of 10 million people is going to develop. In fact, the F-35 is developed by 17 countries. It's a very complex supply chain. So I think it's unlikely that a country Israel size, by the way, the UK also can't do it, right? And they're a lot larger size, can build and access those most advanced platforms. And so I think it's necessary to have partners and allies with whom you collaborate on that. And Israel is a big contributor to the F-35. Lost in the shuffle of all the nonsense that goes on social media and in the United Nations was the fact that I think it was 20 military leaders came to Israel over the last week uh, to check out how Israel succeeded in this war, both in minimizing civilian casualties and inflicting damage. People buried underground, or burrowed underground is probably a better way to say it. People burrowed underground, firing missiles at their civilian centers. We should just marvel at that for a second, right? The amount of innovation in battlefield that Israel showed the world and that they turned up to see is unbelievable. And so we are contributors to the F-35 and to many other platforms, including Iron Dome and many others, some of which is ours. And so, but the big platforms still require a superpower as of now. That's point one. Point two is what the prime minister said, and I think correctly. I'm not sure the word choice was great, and I wrote something criticizing it or rewriting his speech for him. And I think that we are going to need to become more independent. But the notion of independence is not independence for only independence sake. It's also independence because we need to come into treaties and alliances with other countries, and we need to trade with things. And part of what we can trade with is kinetic weapons, is energy weapons like the new version. Um, and
Iron Beam.
Iron Beam, right? And there'll be others. We need to create assets that other countries need in their own military offense and defense. That makes us indispensable. We become less dependent on others when we do that. And then the third part of this is it's a constantly evolving landscape, right? So we had a seven front war right now. Turkey's building a military. People aren't paying that much attention to it yet, but they really should be. That's a big deal. They have a giant push to build naval vessels. And Israel's going to need to figure out what we do in various parts of our defense, in the water. The Houthis are very far away. They're on the water. They're right on the Red Sea. They're causing significant damage, not just to Israel, by the way, to the U.S. and to Egypt and to India and other places. And this is going to require us to A, have more regional and global alliances, and two, to develop more weaponry and technology to get after that and create. Again, we need assets to leverage to become an asset uh, for friends or future friends of the state of Israel who want to defend where they are and a free way of life.
Let's go, Michael, to some of the questions that we have from our viewers. The first one is from Judith Karen or Karen. How does the Haredi population affect Israel's economic situation since their population is increasing? She adds that Haredi households pay only about a third of the direct taxes of non-Haredi households, and their dependence on state transfer payments is greater, and this strains public finances given low Haredi productivity. Uh, Costing Israel, she says, roughly 2% of its GDP. What's your view there?
I don't know if her numbers are right, but they're close. And the average, as you said, one third member of the population is, I think it's spending like 10,000 shekels um, to finance less productive parts of the population. This can't continue. It can't continue. But the state, because of political exigencies, has continued to fund this nonsense, and I call it nonsense. But I have a view that's maybe different. I've been saying this and writing this for 15 years. I think there's the demographic scare tactics that people are using are not correct. You see more and more Haredim in the workforce. That's number one over time. I think, unfortunately, because of AI, and I did
Men as well as women?
no men less than women, but
Yeah.
I'll come back to that in a second. So, and I did a podcast or a video on this with one of the Haredi websites called Kikar Shabbat about 2.5 years ago, before the war, on how AI was going to undermine the Haredi women because many of them are underskilled and are kind of entry level people, even if they've been at it for 10 years. Not all of them, but there's a lot of them that have been low skilled for reasons I can't begin to explain, but mostly I think because the rabbis wanted to keep them under thumb. And so um, this is going to need to change. But here's the upside. You ready? So Code, which is a program for Haredim to go into 8,200 in the military, is exploding. Okay, and it's doubling or tripling every year. I think they're up to 1,400 people in the program, and that's moving forward quickly. It's early green shoots, but Hashmonaim, the army unit for Haredim, has grown. We see more and more recognition that a lot of these kids who can't sit and learn yeshiva need to go out and work, and many of them are working kind of off the books right now, as you'd call it in English. But they're trying to figure out how to get out there. And the problem is the Haredi politicians and the rabbis are just clinging to power. And I'll argue, for those of you who've read Clay Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma, they're stuck in an innovator's dilemma here. If you haven't read the book, you should read it. The rabbis and the politicians are Kodak in 1997, 1998, 1999, when the digital camera is starting to come, and they're protecting the film industry. And I think the younger generation, and I spent a lot of time talking to younger Haredim, they're trying to figure out a way out of it. Right now, the sanctions are super high. But if you pull the economic incentive, If you pull the economic incentive to be on the dole, I think you're going to see a radical change. Something else to point out, by the way, is that the Haredi representation in the Knesset hasn't grown dramatically with the population, and that's like a head scratcher, I think, for many people. But I think it's because we have kind of two classes of Haredim, the one that gets the headlines and what I call the Israeli Haredim, who have become already more mainstream, at least in their thinking, even if they're kind of shackled or stuck into it. And some of them, by the way, want to live that lifestyle in part and be a part of the shul that they're involved in and be a part of the social and the kiddush and the school system, even if they want to kind of more mainstream themselves into Israeli society. So I'm actually super optimistic about the young generation. I think unfortunately it's going to go through a valley of real heartbreak before we get to the right outcome here. And I think again it's economics. It's all
Rob,
day economics.
Robin, last name initial T, asks a question that I always wonder about. Any truth to an Israeli brain drain? That is to say, emigration from Israel. When I read Haaretz, I read about people leaving the country. When I read the Times of Israel, I read about people coming into the country. What's your sense of where the best and brightest are coming or going?
First of all, I don't encourage you to read Haaretz. That's the first thing. Um, so you don't want to respond to that, Brett.
I read all kinds of things I don't agree with.
Okay, good. Um, so that's a very good question. So here's I want to attack actually two topics at once. There's been a lot of talk about cultural boycotts and BDS and this, that, the other this time. I showed a timeline at our annual meeting with our investors of all the times since I've been moved to Israel that there have been cultural boycotts, some worse than this. And I find the same thing happens. This goes on for 2 or 3 years and then somehow self-corrects itself. I think what might be different this time a little bit is it's also coinciding with an absolute decline in Europe and a change of the European demographics. So for those who care about some of these European places, it may be longer lasting there because of the demographics of Europe. But that's like a topic that keeps coming up, like the brain drain topic. So the brain drain topic, as long as I've been around in the technology industry in Israel, has been a topic. And by the way, some of the quote unquote brain drain is a blessed brain drain. What does that mean? People go off to California or to Boston or New York for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and they come back with with more experience, more management experience, with different experiences, and that's valuable for the local economy. Part of what's created the explosion in Startup Nation is exactly that. We're now 30 plus years, 35 years into it. We cycled people through 2 cycles in the United States in the technology industry, and now they're back in Israel running these companies. So that's point one. Point two is I think it's reasonably fair to say, and I gave a talk at Tel Aviv University last night to kind of executive MBAs. I asked people, how many of you are just tired? And like 20% of the room's hands went up. I said, come on, you don't have to be embarrassed about it. And then about 50% of the room's hands went up. It's been 4 years. It's actually 5 years between COVID, judicial reform, and now a war. People are tired. They are tired. Our children and our in-law children will often battle for 2 years. It's tiring. And it's okay to say that. At the same time, by the way, you hear my voice. I'm energized because I think there's incredible things to do here. But we need to understand that people are just tired. I got a note from a friend of mine today who's been in Barcelona for the last year and a half. He told me he was on his way back. Something happened, but he'll be back. And he said, in a year. And when I'd asked him, like, I don't know, it was probably 6 months, 8 months ago, I said, why'd you go? He said, I was just tired. And so I think there's some number of people who are just tired, need a breather, and will come back. And so that's one element. The numbers, when you look at them, having said all that, the numbers, when you look at them, tell the following story. There is an increase in aliyah and an increase in quality aliyah to Israel, even when you net out the kind of Ukrainian, Russian war refugees. Another funny line, by the way. What does the war between Russia and Ukraine and October 7th have in common? Everybody booked a flight to Tel Aviv. Um, and so there are a tiny number higher people who are leaving the country on an annual basis. It's not meaningful over the last 2 years. That's number one. Um, but it's not that meaningful. The number that is a bit worrisome is the number of people who normally come back, Israeli born, who normally come back versus who's been coming back over the last 2 years. The last 2 years has been lower returnees than previously. What we need to look at is whether that is war related or something else related. And I think we won't know that answer for another 24 months. But if you ask me for my cause of concern, that's probably a couple of thousand people, but who are very big wage earners and very big creators in the Israeli economy. That's one area that I have concern. I think the third potential area that I would pay attention to goes back to what Bret was asking earlier. What you were asking earlier about coalition. I think we need a different coalition next time. Otherwise, we'll lose another group of people who I think want to see political change. I don't know how big they are. I don't know how productive they are, but I hear that whisper. Whether people do it or not, I don't know. And then the next element that we just don't know about is the effect of increasing anti-Semitism on this. If past history is any indicator, people will wait till the last minute before it gets really uncomfortable. The one difference this time is that there's a state of Israel. And I'm seeing an increasing number of young people. I'll tell you an anecdote also from yesterday. So I started and chair, and the woman named Abby Owen runs an organization called Nevo. I set this up, I think it's 6 years ago now, to help Olim, people move to Israel in high tech, get ahead. And thank God it's been super successful. But one of the things we challenge the fellows with is they have to go off and set up kind of something that'll help the country. So yesterday I did a call with three French Olim who are doing well here, young people, by the way, in their 20s, in their late 20s. And they decided that the problem with getting their French compatriots to make Aliyah was that the job search, economics again, wasn't resolved before they came here. They had an idea. They created a list of, I think they said 55 super high quality people who work in high tech in France, Jews who work in high tech in France. I think 60% of PhDs, like an insane number. And they matched them with French Olim who'd been successful at high-tech companies in Israel, at Google, at Israel Aircraft Industries, at Monday.com, at Wix, etc., and made them their Aliyah mentor and concierge. And they said to them, your job, Mr. Mentor, is not to just give him advice, but to actually place him at your company. And they did a pilot for 3 months, and they placed the first 5 in 3 months. That's stunning. And these people have moved here. And now they're working on the next 50. And I think that's interesting. And I think, in different countries in the world, certainly in France and the UK, maybe other places, there will be a high quality aliyah as we now unlock this that will also bring in people. So that's, I think, the balance.
Well, that's the first recommendation I've ever heard for Mamdani's mayoralty, but maybe the only one. It will also encourage Aliyah
Hey,
for.
Bret, on the cover of my book, The Vanishing Jew from a decade ago, okay, I did like a Persian party on there because it's about the Book of Esther in modern America. And so Persia then and modern America now. The cover has on it like Karl Marx's face. He was Jewish, in Persian, and Bernie Sanders. And here we are with his protege now running New York.
Let me ask you a question from Judith Rosenberg, an astute question. Can you speak a little bit about the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange? How large is it? And how many securities are traded there? Also, can you speak about individual tax rates and taxes on capital gains and interest and dividends in Israel?
Oh,
Very
God.
topless question.
Yeah, so I think there's like 450 names on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. It's not that big, but it's the best performing stock exchange over the last 2 years anywhere. Um, and if you own the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange ticker, I think you've made close to 300% over the last 2 years. You should have followed Bill Ackman into the stock. Um, the to capital gains, I think, is like 24, 25%. If you make too much money, they charge you like a luxury tax here of like 3% that came in during the war, if I remember correctly. Um, if you think you make a lot of money, you get a 5% luxury tax on top of that. Um, but I'm not a tax expert, and I wouldn't take me for tax advice nor investment advice. You might lose a lot of money. And so, what else? What else was in the question there? Is it a vibrant exchange? No, I think it will be. I actually have a tweet storm coming on this next week, and why I think the moment for the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange has arrived. That has a lot to do with how prohibitive it has become to go public on Nasdaq and the New York Stock Exchange for growth tech companies. And I think the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange can, with a couple of twists and jujitsu moves, become a home for growth tech companies going public.
Gideon Wachtel wants to know this. He says some would claim that the economic advancements Israel underwent are the direct result of the 1993 Oslo agreements. Do you believe Israel will need to take similar geopolitical risks to become a trillion-dollar economy? You actually discuss this at the very end of your essay, but I think in a different way. Want to take that on?
I think, first of all, the most important thing that happened to the Israeli economy was not 1993, but 2003, which is when Netanyahu was the finance minister and he really desocialized the country. By the way, he also cut entitlements for Haredim, and really broke open the economy. I think that's actually, if you look at the graphs, that was the most important thing that's happened over the last 30 years. Um, and I think the second most important thing, for what it's worth, was the failure of the Laviv fighter jet project in the late 80s. Because what happened was you had this really grandiose and aspirational project where people felt, if I can build a fighter jet in Israel, I can do anything. And then it failed, and all this great engineering talent poured out into the market. And in 1991, there was an enlightened program called Yozma. Really, one of the few times that a government has really sparked an industry where they matched global venture capital funds and enabled them to kind of a loss protection on their investment. And so all this engineering talent that came into the market and entrepreneurial talent that came into the market met capital for the first time. And that's really the explosion. I don't think, candidly, the Oslo Accords had anything to do uh, with the economic growth. If anything, you can make the opposite argument, which is all the terrorism that ensued afterwards was problematic. Having said that, I think the Abraham Accords is a massive unlock, a massive unlock. Um, I was in Riyadh 2 weeks ago for the first time speaking at FII. I've been in the Emirates 15 or 16 times, maybe more. I can't tell since the Abraham Accords were signed. And I think that opens up regional cooperation or regional trade. It opens up parts of the world that weren't opened up to Israel before in a very meaningful way. The UAE has become a massive trading partner of Israel since the Accords were signed. There's quiet business that goes on with Indonesia already, and if they join the Abraham Accords, that will be meaningful. The C5, Kazakhstan, which already had relations with Israel, kind of joined the Accords. I think you could see a series of people joining the Accords who will matter a huge amount to the economic growth of Israel. By the way, there's already massive trade, massive maybe overstated, significant trade in defense and other areas with Morocco. And I think that will expand. And so I think the Abraham Accords matter more than anything, actually.
Just a quick note, a footnote to that last question from Judith Rosenberg. She is Joe Rosenberg's middle daughter of Joe Rosenberg of blessed memory, one of the most delightful, interesting, vivacious, hilarious investors I've ever known, longtime partner of the Tisch family at Lowe's, and someone I remember with a great deal of warmth and fondness. So I'm glad to know his daughter is on the call. This is a question from Saul Pavis. I hope I'm not botching your surname, Saul. What about the peripheral areas? How to make them join this trillion-dollar economy? And I think by periphery, Saul is not just speaking about the geographic peripheries, but some of the more peripheral communities, Israeli Arabs, people in the development towns in the south, the kind of the broader concept of a periphery in Israel.
First of all, this is a fabulous question, and one whose time is due. Uh, I don't think that I have a great answer. That's the first thing I want to say. My own view is that this starts with transportation more than anything else. The traffic in Israel is horrific. It's getting worse by the day. The trains are insufficient. And even though I was in the UAE last week and they were talking to me about Joby, which is like this first, quadcopter that carries people around Dubai, I don't see that coming to Israel anytime soon to leap over the traffic, unfortunately, because we don't even have autonomous vehicles yet or Uber. So those will take a long time to come here. I think the most important thing we can do is actually build high-speed rail, very high-speed rail from the north and the south into Tel Aviv to start. That's, I think, number one. That's not sufficient, though. Number two, I said, we're growing Israel by a city of Modi'in every year, right? We have a couple percent population growth and 10 million person population. It's 200,000 people a year. We had to add a city of Modi'in every year. That means we're going to need to add to the centers of the north and the south, which is roughly Haifa and Beersheba. Yokneam is already growing very nicely, which is right near Haifa, but we're going to need to massively invest in those areas and figure out what their mojo is. I doubt it's going to be finance. I'm dubious as to whether it's going to be kind of the high tech that Tel Aviv is famous for because it doesn't have critical mass. So we need to figure out what that is. Planned economies stink. Um, so I don't think that's the right answer. But some entrepreneurs or enterprising people in the Gaza envelope, Beersheba, are going to have to figure out what the South is going to stand for. And same in the North, where people haven't fully moved back to yet and is less well handled post-war than the South is. And I mentioned before that I think the citizenry in Israel is second to none. Unfortunately, um, the government has failed miserably over 20 plus years in trying to solve what you call the periphery problem. I think it is incumbent upon the citizens of Israel, as I like to say, to strap four people to their soldiers and march them into the 21st century. We're going to need a civic movement that focuses on what you call the periphery, and I call the not yet economically empowered, to really help upskill them, get them ready for this AI era, and do that. And the last thing I'll say is the following. Um, I've written this publicly; it's no secret. We need to dismantle the education ministry in Israel. It is a failed institution, and it
Oh,
is.
well, we're trying something like that in the United States, I might add.
Yeah, yeah. It's the United States is a little different because it's much bigger, et cetera. But ours is a very centrally controlled education system that has declining results. If these guys were investors, they'd be out of business decades ago, 2 decades ago. And so we need to take it apart because we need to redo education for the modern era. I've been very public about that for much time, and we need to start in the periphery. The good news is that there starts. Some of you may know Mark Rowan is. Uh, he helps run an organization called DARCA, which has done an incredible job all over the country, really improving education dramatically. They did something really radical, by the way. They chose a new principal and gave him the right to hire and fire teachers. How radical is that? And amazing, the grades go up and the erudition goes up, and the success of the people goes up.
You
So
know, I remember
the
when I
fixes
was
aren't
editor,
big. Yeah.
when I was editor of the Jerusalem Post, uh, I seem to remember we had a story that South Korea had sent some education ministry officials to Israel because they figured that the secret sauce of Israel's high tech economy was great public school systems, which tells you everything about sort of the misplaced assumptions of that ministry. It had to be explained to them that the whatever the secret sauce was of Israel's innovative genius, it was not in schools. It was maybe in a certain style of parenting, and of course in the army.
Can I tell
One,
you a funny story about that before your last
yeah.
question? So I know someone who was on that visit. He tells a great story. He said that they're outside the education ministry building in Jerusalem, which is not far from the old city. It's a beautiful old building. And he kind of proudly says to the South Koreans, this is our education ministry headquarters, but we also have a building in Tel Aviv. We have one in Beersheba. We have massive amounts of force. And the South Koreans, who have about, I guess, 5 times the population, 6 times the population, we do. That's funny because our education ministry is about half the size of this building.
One final question in the minute we have left. An anonymous attendee asks a good question. Is there a similar program to the one you mentioned, referencing the French guys in their 20s for Olim? Is there a program for Olim in their 50s and 60s with valuable accumulated wisdom and life skills, professional networks, but lacking fluency and skills in leading edge tech? Um, in other words, opportunities for eager Olim in their 50s or 60s to still contribute to the state and make a life for themselves in Israel.
My parents moved here in their mid to late 40s, and I think they've made a meaningful contribution. I don't know how to speak specifically to that question and whether this exists. I will tell you that the Aliyah ministry has set up recently a concierge system. So you can literally reach out to them and say, I need an Aliyah concierge to help me figure out where I can contribute to Israeli society. They'll assign you somebody. They're younger, by the way, generally, because that's the way they take the government salaries. And they can put you in touch. I'm not aware of any specific program for that, but reach out to the Aliyah Ministry, and I'm sure somebody. Literally, they've done a really good job of kind of upping their game over the last 12 months. Great shout out. I think the Director General of the Aliyah Ministry, is a guy named Avichai Kahana, is one of our best public servants in the country. A remarkable guy. He's done incredible work there over the last couple of years.
Michael, it has been an absolute joy to have this conversation. And I want to also thank so many people in our audience who kept asking great questions that kept us going. We'll have more SAPIR conversations, and please go to sapirjournal.org, read Michael's brilliant essay and many other exceptional essays in that issue. And thanks for being part of this community. We can't thank you enough.
By the way, Brett, that's the greatest unlock for me to get a compliment from you to say it's a brilliant essay. I can go home for the rest of the month now. That's the best compliment I can get. So thank you for that, and thank you for
Well,
everything
it
that
has
you
the
do.
added benefit of being true, as they say. Take good care. Have a
Thank
great
you. Bye bye.